Hello and welcome to my YouTube channel Tech Labs by Harimindi. In this video tutorial, we will be discussing about transparent data encryption. In short, we call it as TDE. TDE is a data at rest encryption introduced by Microsoft in SQL Server since SQL Server 2008 version. So this is a solution that encrypts the data in the database by encrypting the physical files and also the database backups. So the TDE performs a real-time I/O encryption and decryption of data and log files. So basically the MDF and the LDF files. Database is encrypted by a key, which in turn is protected by a certificate. Encryption of the database file is performed at page level. This happens by encrypting the database. The pages in an encrypted database are encrypted before they are written to disk and decrypted when read into the memory. So TDE does not increase the database size. That's a point to be noted here. So let us try to find out what is the key hierarchy and how does the TDE works. So this is a snapshot or a picture that I've taken from Microsoft website. So this is the key hierarchy. So the ones in blue are not user configurable, and the ones in orange color are the ones user configurable. So at the top, it is the Windows Operating System Level Data Protection API, in short DP API. So this encrypts the service master key of SQL Server. The service master key for SQL Server is created at the time of creation of SQL Server instance. When we create a master key in the database, in the SQL Server master database, this service master key encrypts the master key in the database. So the process that we are going to follow here to enable TDE will be, first we would be creating a master key for the SQL Server instance, which is inside a master database. That master key creates a certificate in master database. So we would also issue a create certificate statement, because afterwards when we actually create the database encryption key, the certificate that was created earlier will encrypt the database encryption key. So once you have completed these actions, then you would be enabling the TDE on the database. And there are a few important points that needs to be noted. So the first and the foremost important point is, when you enable TDE on a database, backing of the certificate and the private key associated is very, very important, because without which in future if you need to restore the backup of a database, you will not be able to perform that. We will also try to see that in the practice lab that we are going to do now. DB backup, you also need to take the database backup after enabling TDE. Once you enable TDE, all the pages are read into memory and then encrypted. So this would take some time based on the size of the database. Once the once the TDE is enabling is completed, it is always a best practice to take the full backup of the database. Else you might have some transaction logs which are still encrypted. So you probably would not have a consistent database. I mean to say, like, in future, when you're trying to go back in time and try to restore a particular database to a point in time recovery, so there you might have some logs which might be encrypted or not encrypted. So it's actually a little complex scenario. And also important point to note here is the tempdb. Tempdb also gets encrypted, and this will have a little performance effect on the unencrypted databases. Replication. So by default, TDE database does not enable the same on subscriber or the distribution databases. This needs to be handled separately. TDE on always on is slightly a different process. As I mentioned, we will discuss this at the end of this tutorial. So now let's try to see how we can enable TDE, and also we will try to take a backup of the TDE enabled database and restore it onto a different server, and let's see what happens. And during this process we will also see how to back up the certificates, how to restore the certificates, and then restore the TDE enabled database backup. Okay, so to get started, I have my Azure VM. Okay, let me just bring it up. Okay, here you go. So I have Azure VM here, and this is the SQL instance that I have got. Right, currently it is running on SQL Server 2019, and the database I would want to encrypt is the clinic database. So as I mentioned, the very first thing, this is a set of scripts that I have actually prepared. These scripts, this script file, you should be able to download it from my GitHub profile. You can find the link in the description. Okay, to get started, as I mentioned, the very first thing that we're going to do is to create a master key. So, and the master key will always be in the master database. All right, so I have already put in the password there. Okay, so the master key is created, and this is the script to create a certificate. So remember, the name of the certificate is TDE_cert. Okay, once the master key and the creation of the certificate is completed, the final process in the step is to create the database encryption key. So currently we are creating a database encryption key for only the clinic database. Just to give a little more clarity, I have 3 databases here. So right now I'm trying to encrypt, enable TDE only on the clinic database. And let's say if I need to do it on the sample DB, then I need to create another database encryption key. So currently I'm doing it only for the clinic database, and this is the script. So it's a create database encryption key. We specify the algorithm, encryption by server certificate TDE, because that is the server certificate that we have created earlier. Okay, let's run this. Perfect. So now the database encryption key is created. There's a little warning which says that you have to back up the certificate, because we have created the certificate but we haven't backed it up. So the very first thing that you need to do when you create a certificate is to back it up with a private key. I have the code here. So here we are backing up the certificate TDE cert to the location, file location. This is where, and this is the name of the certificate with a private key. This is the private key with which I'm going to back it up. And encryption by password, I'm giving a different password from the original one. This is the password for the private key, in fact. Okay, let's back up this certificate first. Okay, let's see. Okay, this is actually running under the clinic database, so let me just put it into the master. That's the reason we're getting this message, because the certificate is always in the master database. Perfect. So there you go. Let me show you the physical files. So this is where it is. So this is the certificate and this is the private key. Okay, so now that we have created a master key, then we created the certificate, we created a backup of the certificate encrypted by a private key, and then we have created a database encryption key. And the last step in this process, we need to enable the encryption, TDE. Alter database, the database name, set encryption on. This is the command that we need to execute. All right, so now TDE is enabled. So to demonstrate this, what we will do is, we will now that this is relatively a small database, so that's the reason it just got completed quickly. Or else if it's it depends. This enabling, when you enable TDE on the database, sometimes it might take a little longer based on the size of the database. Now the next process or the next thing that we are going to do is to back up this database. We'll take a full backup of this database. So the location and the name is correct, so I don't need to go into other options. So the backup is completed. Let me see the backup. There you go. So now I have the backup, I have the certificate and the private key. Now okay, let me actually copy the backup file. First, let us try to restore the backup file on another SQL Server instance. So I'm going to copy this backup file to my local machine. Okay, well, we have the backup file here. On my local machine, I have another SQL Server 2019 instance. There is an existing database. Let me delete that. And then let's try to restore the database from the backup. So remember, we have enabled the TDE, and after that we have taken the backup. So right now the backup is TDE protected. Okay, here is the location, file location. I would not really go deeper into the other details. So let's try to restore it. Let me just click on OK and let's see what happens. There is an error message straight away, and let's click on that message. It says that cannot find the server certificate with thumbprint. This is expected because it is an encrypted database and there is no certificate for that. Okay, now what we need to do. So we need to have the certificate along with the private key, which needs to be restored here. And to do that, I will go back to my VM again, copy the certificate and the private key, put it back in my local machine. Shouldn't take long. And open up my SQL Management Studio. Okay, and the master key is always a unique. I mean, you are not going to really back up the master key. Only thing that we are going to back up is the certificate. So we are going to restore only the certificate. So before that, there needs to be a master key for the SQL Server instance. And so this is my destination server. Here I create a master key now. It is created. Now, instead of this command, instead of creating a new certificate, I'm going to restore the backup of the certificate. So this is the command that I'm going to use. So how to restore the certificate? We are going to create a certificate, TDE cert. Remember, that is on the other server it is TDE underscore cert. Here there is no underscore. From the file, this is the location where I have it. So this is the one we are speaking about. And also we need to give the location for the private key and also the decryption password. So remember, we have encrypted by a password. We have encrypted the private key with a password, and we have to give the same password here. So you need to store the certificate and also store the password as well. So please keep that in mind. Okay, now I'm going to create the certificate first from the backup. Okay, now the certificate is created, and now that certificate is created, that has got the database encryption key with it. So I don't really need to bother about any database encryption, because the database encryption key or the certificate is the one that is having the decryption key for the database. Now we should be able to restore the database. Okay, now click OK and let's see. It is processing and done. So the database is restored successfully. Now this process was successful only because there was the certificate which is there in the source database, source SQL instance, which we have restored it here, which has got the decryption key. So this is how you restore a TDE encrypted database. All right. I hope this gives you a good clarity on how things need to be done when you need to enable transparent data encryption on SQL servers. I also wanted to show you, just in case in future, for any reason, whatever the reason is, you really do not want to have the TDE now, you want to disable it and you want to drop the keys. And how do you do that? So to start with it, what I would do here is, so the first thing that we are going to do is we are going to disable the encryption on the database first. That's the first thing that you're going to do. So this is the command that I'm going to use. So use master alter database clinic set encryption off. Right, so that will disable the TDE on this particular database now. Now once that is done, now let's say you don't even want to have the certificate and the master key also, and I mean you want to really drop them off altogether, I mean completely. So this is the next thing that you're going to do. So first thing is you are going to drop the database encryption key. So drop database encryption key, that is the command. Let's execute that. That is done successfully. And remember, this is the certificate name. So now I'm going to drop the certificate. And finally, we want to drop the master key. So this is what you do. Use master, drop master key. All right. So now what I did, from my VM machine, I encrypted the database, took the backup of the keys, took the backup of the database, and brought them onto my local machine. I restored the database here with the help of the keys, and then I have completely removed the encryption, the database level encryption, and also dropped all the keys. So that's what I've done. So pretty much it's like, absolutely no keys, no TDE on my local system, local SQL Server instance. All right. So this is how you configure or enable TDE, and if needed, you probably want to drop them as well. Okay, now that concludes this session about TDE, and as I promised in the beginning, let's discuss a scenario about always on availability groups. How do you do that? Now that you know how to create the keys and enable encryption. So if for always on availability groups, let's take two scenarios. So one scenario where the databases are in always on availability groups but are not encrypted, and the second scenario is a database is encrypted with TDE and is not part of always on group. So discussing about the first scenario here, so if the database is an always on availability group and not encrypted, and you want to enable TDE on those databases, so first create the database master key on the primary replica, and then create the certificate on the primary replica, create a database encryption key on the primary replica, and after that, do not enable the TDE yet on primary. Now create a database master key in secondary replica, something similar to what we have done when we are restoring the backup. Now create the certificate from backup of primary replica certificate in the secondary replica, pretty much what we have done when we are doing the restore of the database. And after that is done, now enable TDE encryption on the database on primary replica, and that should get replicated to your secondary replica as well. So that is the process if the database is already in the availability groups, always on groups, and is not encrypted. Now in the second scenario, if the database is already encrypted and you need to add that to an always on group, availability group, so the process is a little more complex than the first scenario. Here you create the database master key first in the secondary replica. Mind you, that is not primary, that is secondary replica first that you're going to create the database master key. Back up the existing certificate on primary replica because the database on the primary replica is already TDE enabled. So you're going to back up the certificate of the primary replica, create that certificate from backup of primary replica certificate in secondary. So you are going to just restore or create a certificate from the backup of the primary replica certificate in your secondary. Now add the database to the availability groups in primary replica. Just follow the wizard or T-SQL, whatever you're comfortable with. Once that is completed, create a full database backup. So this is to initialize the encryption. So create a full database backup on the primary replica, and you're going to restore this on your secondary replica. And after that, create a T-log backup on primary replica and restore it on the secondary. So this is to ensure that you're not missing out on any transactions or anything. Once this is completed, join database to availability group and the secondary replica. So this is how exactly you're going to perform if you need to enable TDE on always on availability groups. Okay, so I think so far this is a small session on TDE. I hope this was informative. Thanks for watching, and do subscribe to keep yourself updated on more such videos on SQL Server, Oracle, and other database technologies, along with the cloud computing technologies. Thank you once again.